The little alien girl sat on the cold floor with her favorite toy in her small hands. It was not new, it was not shiny, but it was all she had. The toy was made of cheap plastic, patched many times before. She shook it, hoping the sound would come out again, but instead a sharp crack broke the silence. One of the toy's legs snapped off and the small light inside went dark forever. For a moment, the girl just stared. Then her big eyes filled with tears, and a low sob escaped her lips. She hugged the broken toy to her chest as if holding it tighter could make it whole again. Her mother rushed over. She was a thin, alien woman with tired eyes and rough hands from working too hard every day. She knelt beside her daughter and pulled the toy away gently, examining it. The crack was deep, the wires inside broken, the light gone. Her heart sank because she knew she could not fix it. She looked at her daughter, whose tears rolled down her cheeks silently. The mother's chest ached, not just because the toy was broken, but because this little girl had nothing else. That toy had been her only joy, her only comfort at night when she could not sleep. And now it lay dead in her mother's hands. The mother tried to comfort her child. "It's okay, we will try again," she whispered, though she knew it was a lie. She looked around the dim room. There were no tools, no spare parts, nothing but broken furniture and empty shelves. She pressed the toy against her chest as if wishing could fix it. But wishing never worked. She had wished many times before, for food, for warmth, for her husband to come back from the war, but nothing ever changed. Her hands trembled. She felt useless, powerless, and guilty. She wanted to be strong for her daughter, but at that moment, she felt like she was failing in the simplest way. Her daughter reached for the toy again, clutching it like it was still alive. She cried louder now, her small body shaking. The sound pierced the mother's heart. She wanted to scream, but no sound left her throat. Instead, tears slipped from her eyes too, running down her tired face. She had promised herself she would never cry in front of her child, but now the promise broke as easily as the toy. The room was filled with soft cries, one small, one heavy, two voices in pain but powerless to stop it. Outside, the sound of footsteps echoed faintly. Heavy, steady, human footsteps. They belonged to a mechanic who was walking past the neighborhood after finishing his day's work. He was tired, his clothes stained with oil and grease, but his ears caught something unusual. It was the sound of a child crying, sharp and full of heartbreak. He stopped in the dark alley, listening. It was not just the cry of a spoiled child. It was deeper, heavier. He felt it cut into him. Against his better judgment, he turned his head toward the small broken house where the sound came from. Inside, the mother wiped her eyes quickly when she heard movement outside. Fear rushed through her chest. She lived in a district where humans were not always welcome, and she had learned to keep her distance. When the shadow appeared at the broken doorway, she stiffened. Her daughter clung tighter to the broken toy, her wide eyes filled with both fear and hope. The figure stepped closer, and the light revealed his face. A human mechanic, his hands rough, his eyes steady. The mother's first instinct was to protect her daughter. She stood between him and the little girl, her body trembling, her voice sharp though weak. "What do you want?" she asked, afraid he might bring trouble. The mechanic did not answer immediately. His eyes fell on the small girl and the broken toy in her arms. He saw the way she cried, the way she held onto it, as if it was life itself. Something stirred inside him, a memory of his own childhood when a broken toy felt like the end of the world. He raised his hand slowly, showing he meant no harm. His voice was rough but calm. "I heard her crying," he said. "I just wanted to see if I can help." The mother frowned, her heart racing. No one had offered her help for a long time. Strangers always passed by, pretending not to see her struggles. And now, here was a human, standing in her broken doorway, offering kindness. She did not trust easily, but her daughter looked at him with wet eyes, clutching the toy tighter. The mechanic took a step forward. "May I see it?" he asked gently, nodding toward the toy. The little girl looked at her mother, waiting for permission. The mother hesitated, torn between fear and desperation. Her hands shook as she reached out, taking the toy from her daughter and holding it close. She studied the human for a long moment. Then, finally, with a heavy breath, she placed the toy in his calloused hands. The mechanic looked down at the broken thing. The plastic was cracked, the wires snapped. To most people, it was worthless. But he saw how important it was to the little girl. His fingers traced the broken parts as if he could feel her pain through them. He glanced at the child, who now stared at him with a mix of hope and doubt, her small face streaked with tears. Slowly, he reached into the bag slung over his shoulder. The sound of metal tools clinking together filled the silent room. The mother's eyes widened, her breath catching. She had not expected him to actually try. The little girl's tears stopped for a moment as she watched him kneel on the floor. His hands worked with surprising gentleness, steady despite the dirt and scars on his skin. The mother watched too, torn between suspicion and awe. No one had ever cared enough to do something like this for them. She had begged neighbors before to lend her tools, but they always turned away. Yet here was a stranger, a human, fixing the broken toy with quiet focus, as if it was the most important job in the world. The minutes stretched. The only sound was the quiet clicking of tools, the steady breathing of the mechanic, and the hopeful silence of a child holding her breath. The mother felt something strange. A small, fragile spark deep in her chest. It was not trust yet, but it was the beginning of it. She wiped her eyes again and stared at the human, wondering why he had stopped, why he had cared, why at this moment he had chosen to step into their world of pain. The human mechanic held the toy carefully in his hands. His fingers moved over the cracks with patience, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. The little alien girl's eyes followed every movement, wide and shiny, still wet with tears. She sniffled, but stayed quiet, watching the stranger with a mix of fear and hope. The mother stood close by, arms crossed tightly, unsure if she had made a mistake by allowing him inside. Her heart pounded in her chest, her mind warning her not to trust a human so easily, but her daughter's gaze was locked on the toy, and that gave her no choice. The mechanic placed the toy on the floor. He opened his worn tool bag, and the sound of metal clinking together filled the small, broken room. He pulled out a thin screwdriver and a small roll of wire. His tools looked old, scratched, and heavy with use, but his grip on them was steady and confident. He sat cross-legged on the cold ground, bringing the toy closer to the light that flickered weakly from the ceiling. His head bent low, eyes narrowing as he studied the damage. He muttered softly under his breath, words the mother and daughter could not hear, but his tone carried focus, like he was talking to himself. The mother shifted uneasily, her eyes never leaving him. She wanted to ask why he was doing this, what he wanted in return, but her throat felt dry. No one ever offered help without a reason. In her world, favors always came with a price, and sometimes that price was cruel. She looked at her daughter, who was sitting on the edge of a broken chair, her little feet swinging nervously. The girl's face carried something the mother had not seen in a long time: hope. That hope was fragile, like a thin glass about to break, and the mother feared what would happen if the toy could not be repaired. The mechanic carefully unscrewed the small panel on the back of the toy. The sound of each screw falling into his palm seemed louder in the silent room. The girl leaned forward, gripping the arm of the chair, almost forgetting to breathe. Inside the toy, the wires were frayed, some completely snapped, and the little light crystal was shattered at the edges. The mechanic sighed quietly, but instead of giving up, he pulled out a thin strip of copper wire from his bag. His hands worked slowly, twisting, connecting, steady as if time itself had slowed down. The little girl whispered something softly, too low for him to hear, but her mother caught it. "Please, make it alive again." The mother's chest tightened at those words. She wanted to stop her, to tell her not to hope too much, but she couldn't. She turned her eyes back to the human, watching carefully. He paused for a moment, looking at the broken crystal. His face grew thoughtful, almost sad. He dug into his bag again and brought out a small glass piece, dull and scratched, something clearly taken from another old machine. He studied the size and shape, then gave a small nod. With delicate fingers, he began carving and shaping it with a tiny file until it looked close enough to fit. His concentration was deep, his breath steady, his eyes sharp. Every movement seemed to carry meaning, as if this toy was not just an object, but something more important. The mother's suspicion mixed with confusion. Why was this human trying so hard? He could have walked away after seeing the damage. He could have laughed at them or ignored them, like most people did. Yet here he was, kneeling in their broken home, fixing a worthless toy like it was a treasure. Minutes passed, and the girl's eyes never left his hands. Every twist of wire, every spark from his small soldering tool made her heart beat faster. She hugged her knees, whispering under her breath, "Please work! Please work!" Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her, but she too found herself waiting, her own heart beating strangely with the same quiet wish. Finally, the mechanic closed the panel again. He tightened the last screw and placed the toy gently on the floor. He didn't hand it over yet. Instead, he tapped the side softly, as if asking it to wake up. For a second, nothing happened. The silence grew heavy, so heavy that the little girl's chest trembled as her hope began to sink. The mother's lips parted, ready to prepare her daughter for more heartbreak. But then, a small sound filled the air. The toy's chest lit up faintly, a soft blue glow shining through the cracks. A mechanical hum followed, shaky at first, then steady. The toy's little arm twitched, then moved fully, lifting as if waving. The small speaker inside crackled, and a cheerful sound spilled out, broken but alive. The little girl gasped so loudly it echoed through the room. She covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes sparkling with tears. Not of sadness, but of joy. She jumped down from the chair, rushing forward, and scooped up the toy before the human could stop her. She hugged it tightly, pressing her cheek against its glowing body. "It's alive! It's alive again!" she cried out, her voice shaking with happiness. The mother froze, her heart skipping a beat. She had not seen her daughter smile like that in months. The laughter that came from her little girl now was soft, broken by tears, but it was real. The sound filled the empty house, chasing away the cold silence that usually lived there. The mother's eyes blurred again, but this time it was not just from sadness. The human leaned back, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. He looked at the girl, then at the mother. There was no pride in his expression, no demand for thanks, only a tired softness in his eyes. He had done what he came to do. He had given life back to something that mattered, and he did not ask for anything in return. The mother opened her mouth but found no words. Gratitude swelled in her chest, but fear still lingered. Why had he done this? What did it mean? Yet as she looked at her daughter hugging the toy and laughing, she knew one truth. This moment, this gift, was more valuable than anything she could ever repay. The mechanic stood slowly, picking up his bag. The girl looked up at him with shining eyes, her small voice trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. Those two words, simple and innocent, carried more weight than any treasure. For the first time, the mother's suspicion weakened, replaced by a small, uncertain warmth. The human had not only fixed a toy, he had given them something far rarer. He had given them hope. The toy glowed faintly in the girl's arms, its little movements bringing endless joy to her small heart. She hugged it so tightly that it squeaked, afraid it might break again, but unable to let go. Her laughter filled the small, broken room, and for a moment the air felt lighter. The mechanic, still sitting on the floor, looked at her and allowed himself a small smile. He had seen many broken machines in his life, but this one mattered more, because it was not only a toy, it was her happiness. The mother stood to the side, still in shock. She wanted to say something, but words refused to form. Her chest felt heavy, but this time not only with sadness. It was heavy with emotion, with disbelief, with something she had not felt in a long time. Gratitude. She watched her daughter spin in small circles, showing the toy as if it was brand new. For that moment, the girl forgot the hunger in her stomach, the coldness of their home, and the loneliness that followed them every day. All she saw was the toy moving again, alive like a miracle. The mechanic's eyes did not stop on the girl. As she laughed, he looked around the room. His gaze moved from the broken chair that wobbled on one leg to the cracked roof that dripped slowly in the corner, to the dull wires in the wall that sparked faintly every few seconds. He noticed the small pile of empty bowls in the corner, carefully cleaned but clearly overused. He saw the thin blanket lying on the floor where the mother must have been sleeping, while her daughter took the only bed. Everywhere his eyes landed, he saw struggle. He realized the toy was not the only thing broken in this house. The whole place carried the same cracks, the same weakness. He pressed his hands together, rubbing the dirt and oil from his palms, thinking silently. He had fixed the toy, Yes, but looking at the mother's tired face, he knew this family needed more than just that. The girl needed warmth, food, and safety. The mother needed rest, help, and strength she had lost long ago. He felt a strange weight in his chest, one that was not from tiredness. It was something deeper, something pulling him toward them. He had always fixed machines. It was his work, his skill. But now he wanted to fix more than machines. The mother noticed his eyes wandering around the house. She felt heat rise in her face, shame covering her. She hated that he saw the broken roof, the empty bowls, the cold floor where she slept. She wanted to explain, to say she was trying, that life had not always been this hard. But the words stuck in her throat. She wrapped her arms around herself, as if trying to hide the truth of her life from his gaze. The little girl ran to her mother, still holding the glowing toy. She jumped into her arms, laughing, showing the moving parts as if her mother had never seen it before. The mother smiled, a soft, tired smile, and kissed her daughter's head. Her eyes lifted toward the human again. For the first time, she did not look at him with suspicion, but with a quiet question she did not speak out loud. "Why are you here? Why are you helping us?" The mechanic stood up slowly, his knees cracking after kneeling too long. He slung his heavy bag over his shoulder, but his eyes still studied the cracks in the walls, the weak wiring, the broken door that barely closed. He could fix these things. He knew it. It would not be easy, and it would not be fast, but his hands were built for repair, and this family needed it. He had never planned to stop here. He had only been passing through. Yet now his feet felt rooted to the spot. Something inside him told him he could not just leave. The little girl stepped closer to him, her small hands gripping the toy tightly. She looked up at him with wide, shining eyes and whispered, "It works again because of you." Her voice was soft, but it carried something powerful. The mechanic felt a lump in his throat. He had repaired machines for soldiers, for merchants, for powerful people, but none of them had ever looked at him the way this child did. Like he was more than just a worker, like he was a hero. The mother noticed the silence between them and broke it. "She has nothing else," she said quietly, her voice rough but honest. "That toy was her only joy. I tried many times to fix it, but I couldn't." She looked at the ground as she spoke, unable to meet his eyes. "Thank you. You gave her more than you think." The mechanic nodded slowly. He wanted to say something, but the words felt small compared to what he felt inside. He only managed, "It wasn't much." But it was much. The little girl's laughter still echoed in the air, and even the mother's shoulders seemed a little less heavy. The mechanic turned his eyes once again to the roof, the door, the walls. He could see the repairs in his mind already, the tools he would need, the steps to make this home stronger. A spark of determination lit inside him. He had come to fix a toy, but maybe fate had brought him here for something bigger. The mother walked closer, standing protectively beside her daughter. "You should go," she said softly, though her voice trembled. "People here don't like strangers. They don't like humans. If they see you with us, it could bring trouble." The mechanic looked at her, then at the girl holding the toy as if it was the most precious thing in the world. He thought of leaving, of walking away and forgetting this small family, but the image burned into his mind. He could not ignore it. He had repaired one broken thing today, but he knew he could not stop there. He gave a small smile to the girl, then a steady look to the mother. "Maybe some things are worth the trouble," he said. His voice was low, but the meaning was clear. He was not done here. The little girl tilted her head, confused by his words, but she felt the warmth in them. She stepped closer, her toy glowing faintly between them, and whispered, "Will you come back?" The mechanic's lips curved in a rare, gentle smile. He did not answer directly, but his silence carried a promise. The mother watched him carefully, her heart torn between fear and a strange new feeling. Hope. For the first time in many years, she wondered if someone had finally stepped into their lives, not to take, but to give. The night was cold, and the small house felt even colder. The toy glowed faintly in the girl's hands as she drifted to sleep, curled up in her thin blanket. Her soft breaths filled the quiet room, but her mother remained awake, sitting near the broken chair. She held her head in her hands, her thoughts heavy. The human mechanic had left hours ago, yet his presence still lingered in her mind. She could still hear the sound of his tools, the way he worked without complaint, the way he gave life back to her daughter's only treasure. She stared at her rough hands, scarred from endless work. Every day, she labored in the factory for long hours, lifting heavy pieces, breathing dust, and returning home with nothing but a few coins. Those coins were barely enough for food, let alone for repairs, medicine, or comfort. She wanted to give her daughter more, but life seemed determined to crush that dream. Her husband had once promised a different future. He had been strong, proud, and full of hope. But the war had taken him away, leaving her with nothing but his memories and the child they had made together. She had carried the weight alone ever since, but now it felt heavier than ever. She looked at her daughter, asleep with the toy pressed close. That smile on her face, even in sleep, made the mother's chest ache. It had been so long since she had seen that smile. She whispered softly, though no one could hear, "I wish I could give you more." Her voice cracked and tears slipped down her cheeks. She wiped them quickly, ashamed of her weakness. She was supposed to be strong for her daughter, but tonight the strength was gone. The next day, the human mechanic returned. She was surprised to see him standing at her door, carrying his bag again. Her first instinct was fear. She looked around quickly, worried neighbors might see him. "Why are you here?" she whispered sharply, blocking the doorway. He shrugged, his expression calm. "I thought I'd check the wiring," he said simply. "It could cause a fire." Her heart raced. No one had ever cared enough to notice, let alone return. She wanted to send him away, but her daughter rushed forward, clutching her toy. "You came back," she said with a bright smile. The mother froze. That joy, that light in her daughter's eyes, how could she crush it? Reluctantly, she stepped aside, allowing him inside once more. The mechanic set his bag down and began looking at the walls and wires. His hands moved with skill, his eyes sharp. The mother watched him carefully, still unsure of his intentions. Finally, she could no longer hold her questions. "Why?" she asked. Her voice was low, almost trembling. "Why are you doing this?" He paused for a moment, but didn't look up. "Because it needs to be done," he replied. His answer frustrated her. She wanted something clearer, something she could understand. "People don't just help without reason," she said, her words sharper now. "What do you want from us?" He finally looked at her, his eyes steady but not unkind. "Nothing," he said simply. Then he turned back to his work. Her chest tightened. She didn't believe him, not fully. Life had taught her that help always came with hidden claws. But as she watched him repair the wires, careful not to damage anything, she saw no greed in his face, no hidden agenda in his movements. It confused her, scared her even more. That evening, as he prepared to leave, she offered him a small plate of food. It was all she had, just thin soup and a piece of bread, but she pushed it toward him with trembling hands. "For your work," she said quietly, her voice filled with embarrassment. He looked at the plate, then at her. He could see the hunger in her eyes, the thinness of her body, the sacrifice she was making just to give him this. Slowly, he pushed the plate back. "Keep it," he said gently. "You need it more than I do." Her throat tightened. She tried to argue, but the words stuck. She looked away quickly, hiding the tears burning in her eyes. She hated that she had nothing better to give, nothing worthy of his effort. She hated that her daughter saw her as weak, though she tried to be strong every day. The shame twisted inside her like a knife. She sat down heavily on the broken chair, her shoulders shaking. "I work every day," she whispered, her voice breaking. "From dawn to night. But it's never enough. She deserves more than scraps, more than broken walls and broken toys. And I can't give it to her." Her hands covered her face, tears slipping through her fingers. She did not want him to see, but the pain was too strong to hide. The mechanic stood silently, watching her. He had seen machines rust and fall apart, but the sight of this woman, breaking silently in front of him, felt heavier than any metal he had lifted. He wanted to say something, but words seemed small in the face of her pain. He simply stood closer, his presence steady like a wall. The little girl came to her mother's side, tugging at her sleeve. "Mama, don't cry," she said softly, holding the glowing toy in her tiny hands. "It's okay. We still have each other." Her innocent words cut through the silence, both gentle and heartbreaking. The mother pulled her daughter close, hugging her tightly. Her tears wet the child's hair as she whispered promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The mechanic turned away, giving them privacy. but his fists clenched at his sides. He hated the world for making them suffer this way. When the mother finally lifted her head, her eyes were red but calmer. She looked at the human, her voice quiet but firm. "I don't know why you're here. I don't know what brought you to us. But thank you." The mechanic met her gaze and gave a small nod. He did not say, "You're welcome." He didn't need to. The gratitude in her voice was enough. As he left that night, the mother sat in the dim room with her daughter in her arms. For the first time in many years, she did not feel completely alone. For the first time, someone had listened, someone had cared. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but a small part of her heart dared to believe that maybe things could change. The days slowly turned into weeks, and the human mechanic kept coming back. At first, the mother told herself it would be only once, maybe twice, but soon his visits became normal. He never came with empty hands. Sometimes he brought a small part he had found in the junkyard, sometimes a tool, sometimes just his tired smile. He would sit on the floor, fixing things quietly, while the little girl sat beside him, watching with wide, curious eyes. She had begun to laugh more often, her voice bright in the small house, and the mother noticed how the air inside felt lighter when he was around. The little girl grew braver with him. She no longer hid behind her mother. Instead, she tugged at his sleeve when he worked, asking questions in her small voice. "What is this tool? Why does it make that sound? Can I help?" He always answered patiently, showing her how to hold a screwdriver or how to tighten a small bolt. Sometimes he would let her hand him parts, and her face would glow with pride as if she had done something important. Once, when she managed to screw a tiny piece herself, she clapped with joy and called him Uncle. The word slipped from her lips naturally, but it echoed in the mechanic's chest with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. The mother, however, still carried unease. She would watch them together, her daughter laughing and learning, and she felt torn between comfort and fear. Comfort, because her child was finally smiling again. Fear, because she knew their world was not kind. People would talk. Neighbors already looked at her with sharp eyes. They whispered when they saw a human stepping into her home, and the whispers carried judgment, like poison spreading through the air. But when she saw her daughter's joy, it was hard to ask him to stop coming. The mechanic noticed the whispers too. Once, when he was leaving late in the evening, a group of alien men stood at the corner of the street, watching him with narrowed eyes. Their voices were low, their faces cold. He felt the weight of their stares but kept walking. He had dealt with anger before, and he wasn't afraid for himself. What worried him was the mother and child inside the house. He knew if anger grew, it might fall on them. That night, he lay awake, staring at the ceiling of his small workshop, wondering if his presence was helping or hurting them. But every time he thought of the girl's laughter and the way she looked at him with trust, he knew he couldn't walk away. The mother tried to keep her distance at first. She spoke little, offering him water or a blanket when he stayed late, but always with hesitation. Yet slowly, she found herself speaking more. Sometimes she would sit nearby while he worked, telling him stories about her daughter, how she was born during the last years of the war, how she refused to sleep without her toy beside her, how she always hummed little songs to comfort herself when she was scared. The mechanic listened, nodding, never interrupting. She realized no one had ever listened to her like that. People always turned her away, too busy with their own struggles. But he sat there, silent and steady, as if her words mattered. One evening, the little girl climbed onto his lap while he was repairing a small lamp. She leaned against him, her toy clutched in one hand, her eyes heavy with sleep. The mechanic froze for a moment, unsure what to do, but then he gently shifted his arm so she wouldn't fall. She stayed there, trusting him completely, and soon her soft breaths told him she was asleep. The mother watched from across the room, her heart pounding. The sight of her daughter sleeping so peacefully against him broke something inside her. She had guarded her daughter fiercely, keeping everyone at a distance. Yet here the child had chosen him on her own. Later, when he carefully laid the girl on her bed, the mother whispered, "She trusts you." Her voice was low, carrying both surprise and fear. He looked at her for a moment, then simply nodded. "She deserves someone to trust," he said. Those words sank deep into her heart. Still, doubt gnawed at her. The world was cruel. She had survived long enough to know that kindness often hid danger. One night, when the mechanic was gone, a neighbor woman came to her door. Her voice was sharp, her eyes filled with anger. "You let a human inside your home?" she hissed. "Do you want trouble? Do you want shame?" The mother stood silent, clutching the doorframe, unable to answer. The woman spat on the ground and walked away, leaving her trembling in the shadows. She looked at her daughter, asleep with the toy glowing faintly in her arms, and wondered if she was making a mistake. The next morning, when the mechanic came again, she almost told him not to return. The words sat on her tongue, heavy and ready. But then her daughter ran to him, hugging his leg, laughing with pure happiness. The words died in her throat. She could not take that joy away from her. She turned away, pretending to busy herself, but inside she was conflicted. She was afraid of the whispers, afraid of the danger, but also afraid of the silence that would return if she pushed him out. The mechanic seemed to sense her struggle. He worked quietly, not pressing her, not asking questions. But when he finished repairing the broken lamp, he left it glowing softly in the corner of the room, filling the space with warm light. The mother stared at it, her eyes wet. She realized the light wasn't just from the lamp. It was also from what he had brought into their lives. Hope, laughter, and a bond that grew stronger every day. That night, as she tucked her daughter into bed, the girl whispered sleepily, "Uncle makes everything better." The words struck the mother's heart like a blade, but not of pain, of truth. She kissed her daughter's forehead and stayed awake long after, staring at the lamp's glow. She still feared the world, still doubted what tomorrow would bring. But one thing was certain: the human had already become part of their small, fragile world. And despite all her worries, she could not imagine sending him away. The warmth inside the small house did not last forever. The whispers outside grew louder each day. Neighbors who once ignored the alien widow now stared openly, their eyes sharp with judgment. Some muttered cruel words when the human mechanic passed by. Others shook their heads at the sight of him working on her broken door, or fixing the roof, or sitting on the floor with the little girl who laughed and called him uncle. What began as quiet gossip turned into open warnings. One evening, as he left the house carrying his bag, a group of alien men blocked his path. Their bodies were tall, their faces filled with hostility. One stepped forward and spat on the ground near his feet. "You don't belong here," the man growled. "Go back to your kind." The mechanic said nothing. His jaw tightened, but he kept walking, brushing past them without a word. Their angry voices followed him down the street, and though he did not respond, he knew this would not end easily. Inside the house, the mother felt the tension too. She noticed neighbors turning their backs on her when she entered the market. She saw how other women pulled their children closer when her daughter tried to play nearby. The cruel eyes and whispers hurt. But what hurt more was the fear that one day, the anger of the community would not stop at words. She wanted to keep her daughter safe, yet every time she thought of asking the human to stay away, her heart wavered. She remembered her child's laughter, the warm light from the repaired lamp, and the strength his presence brought. The little girl remained innocent to the storm outside. To her, the human was a hero. She waited eagerly every day, asking, "Will Uncle come today?" When he arrived, she ran to him with a glowing smile, showing him her toy, asking him to teach her more. She had even drawn a small picture on a scrap of paper, with herself, her mother, and the mechanic standing together. She gave it to him proudly, and though his rough hands trembled slightly as he held it, he smiled and tucked it carefully into his bag. But the peace shattered one night. The sky was dark, and the house silent except for the sound of the girl breathing in her sleep. The mother sat awake, her mind heavy with worry. Then the first stone hit the wall. She froze. Another stone followed, striking the door. She rushed to her daughter, holding her close as the child woke in fear. The sound of voices outside filled the night, harsh, angry voices. "Get the human out! We won't let you shame us!" Another stone cracked the window, scattering shards across the floor. The mother's heart pounded wildly. She hugged her daughter tighter, whispering for her to stay quiet. Tears filled the girl's eyes as she clutched her toy against her chest. The mother wanted to scream for help, but she knew no one in the neighborhood would come to her aid. They were the ones throwing stones. The door creaked suddenly, pushed from outside. She gasped, fear flooding her. But then another sound echoed, heavy and strong, footsteps. The mechanic had returned earlier than usual and now stood at the doorway. His broad figure blocked the broken door as he faced the angry crowd outside. His eyes were steady, his voice calm but firm. "Enough," he said. "Leave them alone." The crowd grew restless, some shouting louder. One man stepped forward, pointing at him. "You bring trouble here. If you care for them, leave them. Don't drag us into your mess." Another voice added, "We don't want humans mixing with us." The noise grew like fire, crackling and dangerous. The mechanic did not move. He stood like a wall, his fists clenched, but his body controlled. Behind him, the mother held her daughter snot, her heart torn between fear and disbelief. He could have left them, could have walked away to protect himself, but instead he stood there, shielding them from the anger of many. When a stone flew toward the house, he caught it in his hand before it struck. The crowd went silent for a moment, shocked at his calm strength. He threw the stone down at his feet and spoke again, his voice low but filled with power. "If you want to fight someone, fight me, but you won't touch them." The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of the little girl crying softly inside. The mother's tears fell freely now. No one had ever defended her like this, not since her husband died. She could barely breathe as she watched him standing there, facing the fury of her people alone. The crowd hesitated, unsure if they were ready to challenge him. Finally, after a long moment, they began to retreat, muttering threats, but not daring to strike. One by one, their footsteps faded into the night, leaving broken glass and scattered stones in the dirt. The mechanic turned back, closing the door as best as he could. His eyes met the mother's, and for the first time she saw something in them that silenced all her doubts: loyalty. He was not there for reward, not for gain, not for any hidden reason. He was there because he had chosen to be, because he would not abandon them. The little girl ran to him, wrapping her arms around his leg. Her toy still glowed faintly in her hand. She sobbed, but her words were clear. "Don't leave us." The mechanic bent down, placing his rough hand gently on her head. He didn't promise with words, but his presence was the promise itself. The mother, still shaking, looked at him with tears streaming down her face. For the first time, she let her guard down completely. She whispered softly, her voice broken yet full of truth, "You stayed." That night, as the broken glass lay on the floor and the wind slipped through the cracks in the roof, there was still a strange warmth in the house. Not from the lamp, not from the toy, but from the bond that had now been sealed in fire and fear. The mother knew danger would not end here, but she also knew one thing clearly. She was no longer alone. Someone was willing to stand beside her, even when the whole world turned against them. The morning after the attack, the house was quiet but heavy with the memory of fear. Shattered glass still lay on the floor, and cracks in the door showed where stones had hit. The mother swept slowly, her hands trembling each time the broom brushed over the broken pieces. Her daughter clung to the human mechanic, refusing to let him leave. She sat on his lap, her small toy glowing faintly in her hands, her face pressed against his chest as if she feared he would vanish if she let go. The mother watched them, her heart filled with emotions she could not name: gratitude, fear, relief, and something deeper that scared her even more. She had spent so many years building walls around herself, protecting her daughter, never trusting anyone. Yet those walls had been broken by a man who should have been a stranger. He had stood in front of danger, shielded them with his body, and faced down her own people without flinching. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and shaky. "You didn't have to do that." Her eyes were fixed on the floor, unable to meet his. "They could have hurt you. They could have killed you." The mechanic's voice was calm. "They didn't. And even if they had, I wouldn't have walked away." Those words sank into her like fire. She looked at him then, truly looked at him, and saw not just a tired man with rough hands and old clothes, but someone stronger than steel. He had repaired her roof, her wires, her door, but more than that, he had repaired her hope. The little girl lifted her head, her big eyes full of innocence. "Are you going to stay with us forever?" she asked. Her voice was so pure, so direct, that it cut through the silence like a blade. The mother froze, her breath caught. The mechanic blinked, caught off guard, but then he smiled faintly, placing a gentle hand on the girl's hair. "If you want me to." The girl giggled softly, hugging him tighter. "I do. You're my uncle. Maybe even Papa." The last word slipped out, surprising even herself. The mother's eyes widened, her lips parting in shock. She had never allowed her daughter to speak of her father like that. Yet the word came naturally, as if the child's heart already knew the truth. The mechanic looked at the mother, his eyes questioning but steady. She felt her throat tighten. For years she had carried everything alone, refusing to let anyone close. But now her daughter had spoken aloud what her heart had already whispered in secret. Slowly, she knelt beside them, brushing her hand gently over her daughter's hair. "He is not your father," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But maybe he can be the one who stays." The mechanic said nothing. He only looked at her, and in his eyes, she saw an unspoken vow. Not one of blood, but one of choice. He would stand with them, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The days after the attack were not easy. Some neighbors continued to glare, some muttered cruel words, but none dared to throw stones again. The memory of the human standing strong against them lingered like a warning. Inside the house, however, life began to change. The mechanic repaired the broken door, patched the roof properly, and even found scraps of wood to make a small table. Each repair brought not only safety, but also comfort, little pieces of normal life stitched back together. The little girl followed him everywhere, her toy clutched in her hands, watching and learning. She began calling him more than uncle. Sometimes she whispered Papa when she thought her mother wasn't listening. The mechanic never corrected her, and the mother, though her heart twisted at first, found herself unable to take the word away. One evening, as the sun set in glowing orange, the family sat together. The girl played with her toy on the floor, its small light shining warmly, while the mother and the mechanic sat nearby. The silence between them was no longer heavy or awkward. It was calm, like the quiet after a storm. The mother finally spoke, her words soft but firm. "You didn't just fix her toy," she said, her eyes meeting his. "You fixed us." He looked at her, his expression unreadable at first, then softened. "Sometimes things break," he replied, "but broken doesn't mean useless. It just means they need someone willing to repair them." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time she did not hide them. She let them fall, because they were not only tears of sadness, but also of release. She had carried her pain for so long, but now she didn't carry it alone. The little girl climbed onto her mother's lap, holding her toy between them. She looked up at both of them with shining eyes and whispered, "Now we're a family, right?" The mother kissed her forehead, her lips trembling. She looked at the mechanic, waiting. He nodded slowly, and the weight of that simple gesture filled the room with warmth no fire could create. That night, as the girl fell asleep with her toy glowing beside her, the mother and the mechanic stayed awake longer, sitting quietly in the dim light. For the first time in many years, the future did not feel empty. It was uncertain, yes, but no longer hopeless. The walls of the house were still cracked, the roof still thin, but inside it was no longer just a shelter. It was a home. The mechanic leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment, tired but strangely at peace. The mother watched him, her chest heavy with emotions she could not name. Gratitude, trust, maybe even something more. She whispered softly, "Thank you for staying." His eyes opened, and he gave her a small, tired smile. "I'm not going anywhere." The broken toy lay on the table, glowing faintly in the darkness, a symbol of everything that had changed. It was no longer just a toy. It was the beginning of laughter, of hope, of family. And as the night deepened, the sound of the child's soft breathing filled the room, no longer the sound of loneliness, but of a home finally whole again.